And we'd sent this mailer, which was literally a stone in like some hay, laying in some hay. And it was a pebble from the beach. And we just put it in there. We'd mailed it to the client and we said, we're only a stone's throw away. And the client who'd given us the business had actually posted on his blog whilst we were driving back. The reason he gave us the business was he felt the mailer was so creative.
Welcome to Pipelineology, the business-to-business podcast for agencies, consultants, coaches, and businesses looking to build a pipeline of hot prospects ready to buy their products and services. Never wonder where your next client is coming from. To learn more about our strategies, services, and for resources on building your sales pipeline, visit pipelineology.com. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Pipelineology podcast. I'm your host, Gary Ruplinger, and today I am excited to be joined by Mike Maynard, the Managing Director of Napier. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Gary.
Well, I am looking forward to that. Did I say Napier right? Did I get it right this time?
Yeah, that was perfect. That was perfect, yeah.
All right. Excellent. So for anybody who's not familiar with you, could you just give a quick kind of background about you, a little bit about your story and how you got here?
How I got here, purely by accident, I think is the honest truth. So when I was at school, I always wanted to be a mathematician, which is a very sad goal, but that's what I wanted to do right up until basically the last year at school when I got a chance to help build a lighting desk to control the theatre lights at school. And I enjoyed it so much, I thought, forget about that career plan, don't like that career plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and be an engineer. So I did an engineering degree, started doing electronics design, and realized actually I probably wasn't a very good engineer. I was quite good at the design bit. I was terrible at the getting things into production bit. So I thought, well, what could I do? I want to talk about engineering, but I don't actually want to do it. So there was technical support. So I moved into technical support because that was the obvious thing to do. And after a while, I was running the technical support team for a company across Europe. And then I realized that there wasn't really anywhere to go unless I wanted to move to the States in terms of career. So I thought, well, I need another carefully planned career move. Oh, marketing sounds fun. And so I moved into marketing. I became the European marketing manager. And then a few years after that, I was at a training course, actually, and a residential training course. We had a few glasses of wine on the last night. And someone said to me, I said, you should run your own business. And I think they were actually quite nice because I think what they were saying was, God, I really wouldn't want to be your boss, Mike. You'd be a nightmare. But they said it very politely, and I took it as you should run your own business. And actually, about 3 months later, the agency I was working with, the founders decided they wanted to retire, and I got approached. And I thought, well, again, clearly part of my career plan, I'll go run an agency, having never worked an agency a day in my life. And that's how I got here. So it was kind of a random route through technical sales, through engineering, and ultimately into marketing.
Well, very cool. So I know we had a kind of a list of topics that we were talking about before the call here. So if you're good with jumping into it, I'm good with it.
Sounds good.
So I think one of the topics we talked about here is when marketing campaigns don't work.
Yeah. That's always a tricky thing to ask someone who runs a marketing agency because we like to pretend they all work, but they don't.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And there's a few reasons why they don't work. So one is really around poor planning. So if you don't understand your audience, you don't know what you're trying to achieve, you haven't really thought it through, then there's a really good chance you're going to do something that actually isn't going to be effective. Another approach is, I guess, what I call ego marketing, where people really talk to themselves. They talk about what they think they'd like to hear rather than what their potential customers want to hear. And that is a real classic way because it always looks quite good. It feels quite good internally, but it never quite generates results. And then lastly, and I think this is sometimes the hardest one to spot, is when people try and do too much because they're working really hard, they're trying really hard, but they end up spreading themselves so thin. And what you hear is people talking about, the challenge of breaking through the noise in marketing. And if they're talking about that, actually what they're saying is, we've spread ourselves too thin. And so therefore we're not able to break through the noise.
So I guess in the interest of not spreading yourselves too thin, are there certain areas where if you're starting to work with a client, say you're going to look and say, here's where we want to start, or here's the one or maybe two things you want to focus on to start with?
Yeah, and that depends upon the client, depends upon the campaign, but typically, you start from what the client wants to achieve, so what their goals are. And we have a process where we take 4 steps, where we look at the current situation and the goals, we look at the audience and the messaging, then we execute, then we measure. So, that's our 4-step process. And it's really at that start, we look at what people are trying to achieve. And quite often in business to business, you find that actually what you want to achieve is to reach a fairly small number of customers, but they're the big customers, the customers that are going to make a difference to your business. And so quite often a lot of accounts are really, driven by, some element of account-based marketing. So targeting, either specific group of accounts or even specific lists of accounts.
So account-based marketing, then, what you said that is essentially looking at just a very small list of accounts. Is this like where essentially I have them listed by name? Is that kind of what you're saying there? Or I guess maybe could you explain account-based marketing a little bit more?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. A lot of clients have them listed by name. But people do different approaches to account-based marketing, and people have different numbers of accounts they're targeting. So, some clients might be targeting, maybe 10 or 20 really key accounts are going to make a difference. Other clients might have hundreds or even 1,000 accounts. And the ones with 1,000 might be focusing on, particular characteristics of the company. So certain size company, a certain market. But where I find the impact is unbelievably powerful is where a client can come to us and say, do you know what? These 10 companies, if we won 2 of these 10 companies, it would transform our business. Because then you can put all your effort into putting the money into attracting those companies that are going to transform the client's business. Whereas, you could win 100 smaller accounts that really are kind of just going to be noise. So quite often, yeah, it does come down to a specific list of companies. And if you think about, some industries, actually, that's not very hard. If you're trying to sell into the automotive industry, there's a pretty small list of automotive manufacturers. And actually, the truth is, there's a relatively small list of people who supply them, certainly in terms of electronics, for example, or in terms of other components like tires. So if you're trying to sell into industries, actually, a lot of the time, it's not hard to generate a list. It sounds like it's really complicated, but a lot of the time, our clients know exactly who they want to target.
It's interesting you mentioned the automotive space. Down the hall from me, like literally if I throw a rock, I could hit their window, but it's basically the agency that handles most of the American-based manufacturers. So awesome. Ford, or GM, Stellantis now, or Chrysler, but their agency is just down the hall from here. And yeah, that's basically what they do is they run all their TV campaigns. So, and they just have an office here because that's where the headquarters are for those American-based companies. So.
And they're a great example of a company that, even if they don't realize they're doing it, that agency is probably running an account-based marketing campaign because they know who they want to attract. And so they've got to be really focused on a small number of customers that, clearly can make a huge difference to them because, all these automotive guys spend large amounts of money.
So if you're saying, hey, this sounds like a cool idea, when it comes to getting in front of these people, do you have any recommendations on how to do that? Because I'm guessing this probably isn't your typical Facebook ads or Google AdWords type of thing.
Well, the great thing is it can be Facebook ads. It can be Google ads. LinkedIn, for a lot of B2B companies, is a big part of their account-based marketing strategy. So you can be doing those familiar digital ads and focusing the budget just on particular customers. So yeah, you can use all those tactics, but equally you can do crazy things. You can send mailers that are something more than a postcard. We famously had a project where we decided we wanted to pitch local to local clients or local potential clients. And because we're quite focused in terms of being, really looking at technology companies, there weren't very many. So magically we had an ABM campaign because it was relatively easy to get the list of companies. And so we went to pitch one of them, and I remember coming back and we'd won the pitch, and I was so delighted. And I walked through the door of the office, and I was about to do the big announcement, we've won it, it's great. And someone said, we know it wasn't you. And I was like, what do you mean? And we'd sent this mailer, which was literally a stone in like some hay, laying in some hay. And it was a pebble from the beach, and we just put it in there. We'd mailed it to the client, and we said, we're only a stone's throw away. And the client who'd given us the business had actually posted on his blog whilst we were driving back. The reason he gave us the business was he felt the mailer was so creative. And obviously, in that case, the mailer didn't cost us much. The postage was pretty expensive. Stones are not cheap to ship. But we were able to do something really different. It was all hand done. It was, very, very focused, and we could know exactly who to send it to. So the great thing about ABM is whilst it's about focusing down, it's not about restrictions. And that's what makes me so excited about ABM is actually it gives you more freedom. It gives you more opportunity to be creative. It gives you more opportunity to perhaps do things you couldn't do to 10,000 potential customers, but you could do to 10. We're currently working with somebody who runs a patisserie business to send patisserie items to people, and it's great fun. And we can do something that I guarantee a lot of other people are not going to do because they're targeting 500 potential clients, and they just can't spend the money getting handmade patisseries sent around. So to me, I think ABM, yes, it can be Facebook. And you can target Facebook ads down to pretty much an individual if you want to. But it can be so many other things. I think don't be restricted by a particular channel.
So when you think about these, then like roughly how big is your list size for something like this, or like when you did the Stones Throw campaign? Because that's brilliant. I might have to borrow that one, but. How many people were part of the targeting for that, or how many companies were you trying to meet with for that?
So that's a great example of really why there's not an answer to the right number of companies to be on an ABM list. From what I remember, there was about 14 companies, and it was because we identified 14 companies within, I think it was a 20-mile range of the office. And it had nothing to do with us wanting 14 or wanting 20 or 10 or any other particular number. It was just that was the number of companies we identified. And so I think it's all about, again, focusing on who would be your ideal customer, and then really making sure the campaign that you deliver to them is great. That campaign would have worked just as well at 30 or 50 clients, or potentially indeed at 5, if that was all we could find, because it was an opportunity to pitch people with, something that really differentiated us. We were local, and pitch them with something really creative. So in that case, the number was small. We've run other ABM campaigns to bigger lists. I mean, typically we don't run huge ABM campaigns. So we might run to maybe 50 companies, but equally where you've got, large enterprises, and they might be able to put 5 or 10 people to run an ABM campaign. There they can realistically drive very, very large campaigns. And they can, it's not unusual to see a campaign where 1,000 companies are targeted. I've seen campaigns where people have targeted 1,000 companies. They've had 1,000 custom landing pages, one for each particular company. And of course, they're not completely bespoke. They're built using a formula. You've got a company name, you've got a logo, you've got a little bit of text that's specific to them, a little bit of generic text, and maybe a generic form, but you can build something that just feels absolutely personalized without too much effort. And you can build it today with real scale if you've got some resources to support that.
That's very cool. So when you're putting these together in terms of maybe touch points, how many different ways are you trying to find these people or get them to respond? So
that I think really gets to the crux of what ABM is all about. And I love that question. And the simple answer is as many as possible, because what we're trying to do is reduce the breadth of the campaign, focus it down, and really get deep interaction with those clients. So typically you're looking for as many touch points as you can. It does vary from company to company. So we had, one ABM campaign where we were trying to help a client get into a particular potential customer. They tried through sales. They knew the company. This was a one company ABM campaign. And they were just desperate to get a meeting, mainly because the CEO had told the European sales director he had to get a meeting. So, he was under pressure, and it's hard to break through that telephone wall sometimes. So we targeted one company, and actually most of the people we targeted probably only had one touch, but we got a meeting. Probably luck more than, a brilliant campaign. Whereas other campaigns we've been running, we're looking not so much from the Napier point of view when we're looking to attract clients. It's not how many touches we want with a client. It's how many touches per month or per quarter that we're getting. Because with things like selling, marketing services, that can have quite a long lead time to actually go from, being known to the client, so having the awareness, all the way through to them actually deciding to give you an opportunity. You're not going to get a sales cycle to be complete in a month or even a quarter. Quite often we have a year or even 2 years in that sales cycle. So it's really hard to build an ABM campaign for 2 years, or any campaign that runs for 2 years. So quite often what we'll do is we'll chop it down and we'll say, right, we've got this list of clients. We're looking to get this many touches within this quarter. So we're looking to do this activity, and this activity, and altogether that will achieve our goal.
So you're working with pretty long lead times then, in terms of, for these larger accounts, in terms of how long it takes them to go from first touch to, signing that check and ready to and doing business with you.
Absolutely. I mean, some of our clients would say we've got very long lead times. We work with e-commerce clients who B2B e-commerce. And yes, they'll do ABM campaigns. So they'll focus on their key clients, but they'll have very short sales cycles. We also work with other clients that have very long sales cycles. I mean, our client, who I think is our record, talks about a 20-year sales cycle.
Holy cow.
Which is mind-boggling. And they have to do ABM. They actually make baggage handling systems for airports. And they have to do ABM because actually there's very few airports that are going to install like a baggage system that is one of their major deployments. So they've got a very small market, maybe one, maybe two airports a year would have this sort of system. So they're very focused, but they've got to try and engage a client over 20 years. And that again is tough. And again, the way you do it is not by trying to do a 20-year plan for marketing. I can only imagine what you'd be doing if you were planning from even 10 years ago. But I mean, 20 years ago, we'd be running campaigns on MySpace at the moment, which probably wouldn't be effective.
I'm just trying to think back. If that's 2011, what all the big technologies would have been back then versus even just now. So if somebody was trying to do this and said, okay, this sounds like a good plan, or my company needs this put in. If they wanted to launch a campaign, what would be something you'd recommend they could start with today in terms of...
So this is a great question for this podcast, because the first thing I'd do is I'd get marketing and sales to sit down together. And that is something we've not really talked about ABM, but is one of the keys to success with ABM, is to have the marketing and sales team working together. And it's great because when you look at very broad campaigns, the marketing team might talk about a whole number of ad impressions. And a sales team are just going, why do I care about an ad impression? Is more good, or does more mean it's less focused? Or I don't know. But when you talk about ABM, you talk about client companies, customer companies. You talk about the decision makers in those companies. You talk about the buying committee. You talk about the things the salespeople not only know and understand, but also care about. So this is fantastic, because you've got the sales team suddenly seeing value from marketing and seeing a really clear value. And you've got the marketing team able to use this knowledge from sales. So with the two working together, that's got to be the way to start a plan, because there you're pooling all your knowledge together about these customers, about the people who make the decisions. And from that, you'll be able to then build a marketing plan that really uses different tactics. And as I say, it can be a wide range of different tactics.
So how do you get sales teams and marketing teams on the same page? Because I feel like a lot of times that's like herding cats,
Well, I think, and personally, having been on the sales side and been on the marketing side, I think a lot of it is down to marketing talking the language of sales. Because I'm going to be honest, I see sales talking the language of the business. The business cares about, how much revenue they get. Sales talk about revenue. Marketing talks about awareness and perception. It's too remote. So the first step is really to get a marketing team that's able to talk to sales about business goals. And those tend to be sort of sales language conversations. It tends to be things like, how many customers are you going to acquire? What are you going to sell to them? What's the value of the customer? What products they're going to buy? All of this kind of stuff. And I think if you get people talking together like that, and you show marketing that sales actually understands the customer, and you show sales that marketing cares about selling product rather than making something they think looks nice, suddenly you have this realization from two sides that actually they shouldn't fight each other, which happens a lot in organizations, but they're really both aligned and both heading towards the same goal. And to me, that's really exciting. And when that happens, it really helps make those ABM campaigns more effective.
Well, very cool. So when you're trying to measure success on this, are you looking at number of responses generated? Are you looking at meetings booked, or is it actual closed sales? Or what are some of the, key metrics or KPIs for something like an account-based marketing campaign? Can't talk today.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it depends a lot on the situation. And sometimes sales are the right people to tell you what is the correct metric. Now, if you're running an e-commerce business, probably sales value matters. I mean, that's very measurable. You've got a very short sales cycle, so sales really matters. On the other hand, if you've got, a 5, a 10, or a 20-year sales cycle, measuring sales is completely the wrong thing to do, because whatever you do now is not going to impact for another 20 years. So there's really important to understand what needs to be done. And that's something that needs to be, I think, discussed between sales and marketing. Salespeople love meetings. And so sales are always going to push towards the next meeting, the next meeting, the next meeting. And that's fine. But also there can be influencers in the buying committee who you want to reach. So, for example, you might want to reach, chief financial officer, because whatever you're selling is very high value, and ultimately it's going to go to them for sign off. The CFO is never going to take a meeting about the product if it's a technical product. But the CFO might ask very difficult questions. So what you want to do is preempt that. And there may be a white paper you've got that targets CFOs. So it could be your goal from one part of your ABM campaign is to get a certain number of CFOs to download a white paper. And that could be a very simple goal. It's something that perhaps is a little alien maybe to the sales team, and the marketing team perhaps feel more familiar with it. But equally, another element might be we've got this profile of decision makers, and we know that we need to get in front of them and demonstrate our product, whatever it is, whether it's software or physical product. And so then you might want to measure sales meetings and demos. And to me, I think it's about understanding that buying committee, understanding how it works, and where you're strong, where you're weak, and really building up those strengths, but also addressing the weaknesses. And almost all suppliers have significant weaknesses within the buying committee. I mean, typically the weaknesses apply to more members of the buying committee than the strengths do, because probably you've got a salesperson talking to maybe 1, 2, 3 members of the buying committee. So to me, it's all about picking the right metrics, and that's really done through understanding this process or the journey that the customer goes through to buy the product. And that's ultimately what you get out of a really good discussion between marketing and sales.
So when you're doing this, do you find yourself targeting multiple people within the same company? Like in your CFO example, are you also targeting maybe people that would influence the CFO that are more likely to take the meeting while simultaneously trying to influence the CFO to be favorable to the company once that happens?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, I'm trying to stay away from marketing jargon, having said that marketers, talk in jargon and don't really talk the language of business. I mean, the term that marketers use obviously is customer journey, I mentioned, but also personas. And typically you will have a number of people within any of your customers that can be characterized as a kind of stereotype. And so you might have the decision maker. And if you're selling to, IT directors in general are fairly similar. They're fairly similar people. You know what they want, you know what they care about, you know what they don't want to hear. But you might also have the CFO, as you said, you might have the CEO, and they require very different things. So the interests they have, the concerns they have are different, the needs they have are different. Frankly, the level of technical understanding and the ability to, perhaps understand the product you're selling might be very different. So it's all about understanding those different people and being able to create marketing content that really resonates with them, that works well, that they understand, that they trust, and ultimately helps them say yes to the sale. And that again is this real benefit of focusing down is as you focus down in terms of number of customers, you can actually do some personalization. You've got more time, more budget, so you can personalize content that works for the CFO or the CEO or the IT manager, whichever one you want to target with each particular element of the campaign.
Cool. So maybe if we kind of circled back to the beginning then, when we started out with what doesn't work. In terms of this, what are some of the pitfalls or mistakes people make when trying to roll out one of these account-based marketing campaigns?
That's an interesting question. And we see different problems. So, one problem we see is people trying to roll out to a large number of companies straight away. Another problem we see is people running out to a very small number but expecting great results. And I think ultimately it comes down to really needing to plan a sequence of campaigns. So most people, if they're sensible, will actually start out with maybe one or two accounts they're targeting. And there'll be accounts they know well, that the sales team knows well, that they can get a lot of feedback from, and really see if what they're doing makes an impact, because you don't always know what tactic's going to be the most effective. And so you don't want to spend money targeting 1,000 accounts when you could actually learn with one or two accounts. So again, focus down. But at the same time, don't focus down and expect the whole world to change, because it's not going to, or you're going to be lucky. I mean, I mentioned one opportunity where we had one company and we were successful. It's luck whether you're successful, because a lot depends on timing. So I would say build a program to do an initial, one or two target customer kind of learning process, then roll it out maybe to 10. And start making it a bit more commercial, but don't necessarily expect results from those early stages that are measurable in terms of sales or in terms of changes to the business. But as you scale up, then you can start looking for the results. So you're more looking for, the signs things are working. And it's things like salespeople saying, do you know what? So-and-so mentioned they saw an ad, or they asked me a question, which clearly meant they've been to our website, or maybe you're tracking people on the website with marketing automation. So it's those little signs that show that you're doing the right thing, but you're not necessarily going to get the end result straight away. So don't be over ambitious, either in terms of the number of companies, or if you're going small and focused in terms of the results. I think those are the two things. You've got to be prepared to experiment. And so if you put pressure on yourself, either by the fact that anything you do is targeting 1,000 accounts, therefore costing a lot of money, or anything you do has to deliver a sale, you tend to be less willing to experiment. So you're not getting any benefit from, really understanding what those targeted customers actually want and what kind of marketing works with those people.
I love it. Are there any questions I haven't asked you yet, Mike? You're just putting some gold out here, so I'll let you keep going.
Do you know what? I think the one thing I'd say is a question people ask is can ABM be applied to anything? And to a large extent, I think the answer is yes. And I would absolutely say, don't get hung up on the term. Don't get hung up on this fact that you've got to do account-based marketing and it means this, or it means this, or it means this. And, if you want to go and find the definitions, there are organizations that will tell you there's 3 types of ABM, and this is the only way to do it. And just forget that. Think about focusing your marketing budget down onto the potential customers who are going to make the biggest difference to your business. And if you can do that, from my point of view, you're doing ABM, which is great, but more importantly, you're going to get better results and spreading that money far and wide. And so to me, I'd say, don't overthink it, give it a go, and just think about, how you can reach the people who are most likely to really transform your business. And, I'd really like people to give it a try.
Oh, very cool. Well, if somebody is looking to explore this further with you or get some more information about you, where should we send them?
Well, if they want information, just generally, we've got a website. So it's napierb2b.com is our website. If people want to connect with me, I'm very, very happy to talk to people over LinkedIn. If you search for Mike Maynard and find the Mike Maynard at Napier, you'll find me. Or, indeed, if anybody wants to email with me with specific questions, I know your listeners will very thoughtful people. They'll come back with great questions. So they're very welcome just to email me. My email address is mike@napierb2b.com.
All right. Well, very generous of you to give out your email address. I'm sure. Just everybody be good with that, please. But no, please do reach out to Mike if you have questions. We'll make sure we put your website and LinkedIn profile in the show notes in case anybody does want to connect. And again, they've got your email address if they just want to message you directly. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know I learned a lot. Thanks for sharing some of that information with us. I really like that Stone's Throw campaign. Like I said, I might be borrowing that one. It's pretty clever. But thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for all the questions, Gary. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Pipelineology podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and look forward to seeing you on the next one. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.